Just for the average person, average Brit, who wants to try and understand the complexity, or at least understand the challenges the EU, the UK is facing, and the UK scientist community are facing with regards to Brexit, give us an idea of like the impact Brexit could have on science and research.
Sure. I think first it would be good to say that Brexit is already having a damaging impact on UK science, our education institutions and our industry. We often hear about how the banks are preparing to leave, or they're certainly setting up satellite organisations across the channel. And the same, certainly some universities have suggested they might set up French outposts or whatever. But in a more realistic, what's actually happening case, scientists are leaving already. We have spoken to scientists who have already left the UK, taking their talent and skills and gone to work elsewhere. And so there's damage happening to the UK's innovation sector already. And
so scientists are leaving. You actually know that even before
yes.
really the Brexit negotiations have got to any kind of concrete conclusion, they're just too worried about the instability. Is it? Is that what's driving them?
It's I mean there's various reasons. So partly the UK relies on a massive international workforce for science and research and technology. And if you're an international person who's already moved country once, you're educated, skilled and in demand, moving country again is not such a big deal for you. And so retaining that talent is going to be difficult, especially when the general theme of Brexit and the recurring theme from leaked immigration papers from the Home Office, for example, is that we want a hostile environment for foreigners. And so these people feel like they moved to the UK because it was a welcoming international place, and then they're leaving because it no longer is that.
And similarly, you mentioned the universities there. When you say that there is the possibility that they could be creating outposts in Europe effectively to be able to get some kind of funding research and have that the benefits that we are enjoying at the moment. Is that a serious proposal, or is that just speculation? Is that sort of a contingency planning to the max?
It's hard to tell, really. The universities have, over the last few years, been setting up off-site campuses in China to pick up students from there, in the Middle East, for example. And so it wouldn't be too surprising if they did choose to have outposts in France or Germany. But what's perhaps more relevant for talking about universities is that we've had announcements from about 4 or 5 UK universities. There's been at least 2 in Wales, 2 or 3 in the north of England, 1 in Scotland, Heriot-Watt, that have announced cuts and job losses because of Brexit and 7 years of austerity and the fact that there's a perfect storm coming together in the...
So not just Brexit, but Brexit has been an influencing factor. It's not the sole factor.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, they've been, funding has generally been a bit short in all public sector areas. Universities have been no different. And so Brexit threatens to take away students, which pay fees, which help to keep our universities afloat. And EU funding, of course, make talent harder to come by and so on, and there's nothing to compensate from the UK government.
In terms of the funding and the research, in a sort of hypothetical what-if situation, what would happen if, let's say, there is a cliff-edge Brexit, there's a hard Brexit, and we lose access to EU science and research, relationship that we have now? What would happen in your hypothetically speaking?
Well, I mean, so Chris Grayling, when talked a couple of months ago about slow trickles and how they lead to massive hemorrhages, and he was worried. He was talking about shoring up the aerospace industry. He was a bit worried about jobs and technology and so on, business leaving to go to the EU, and how we needed to invest in that. The same happens for science in the UK. We would likely see EU-funded researchers moving abroad. Maybe not in a massive exodus, but over time it would build up. And
something such as the UK offering a similar, in terms of funding, in terms of facilities and research, would you say that wouldn't be enough to stop them from going to Europe to enjoy that sort of pan-Europe benefit?
So it seems unlikely that the UK would be able to increase science funding enough to make it worth people's while to compensate for all the losses. Because it's not just about funding, it's about having the workers, we're a heavily international workforce, having the ability to collaborate with people in other countries, bringing 27 plus all the other countries that are part of the EU science programmes, all of those coming together under common schemes. is almost impossible to replace.
Now, there has been a suggestion that, okay, the EU might not be able to be the UK's, science and research pal and buddy, but there's something to be said about the US and the UK teaming up and far more collaboration happening in terms of science and research there. Do you see that as a credible alternative should there be a harder Brexit where these kind of relationships are going to be strained?
It's a funny one, this. It sort of follows on from the narrative that the EU has been blocking us from having amazing trade deals with countries like the US. And if we're free from the EU, we can do these things on our own. But in science, the EU had never put any blocks in place. And so any relationship we have already with the US is probably about as good as the UK's been willing or keen to make it. And so it's hard to see how we would improve upon that having left. The other thing is that the EU is the world's leading science hub. It produces almost 40% of science outputs. The US is only about 26% or 25% sort of ballpark figure. So we're leaving the bigger partner to go with a smaller partner. The final part on that is that being a leader in the EU's world-leading science hub makes us much more attractive as a research partner for countries like the US and China. So having distanced ourselves from that, again, how do we make ourselves more appealing to increase somehow the relationship that we have with others?
Do you feel any faith in the current government's way they've gone about these Brexit negotiations? Just very briefly, I mean, do you feel confident, and do the science community and the people you talk to within the science community have any faith that the government is actually going to be able to deliver at the end of the day, when it's in 2 years' time and a lot of water has flowed over the bridge? Is there an underlying confidence there?
I would say that in the community there is not any confidence when they look, especially at science, but also in other areas like health research is a big part of British science, modern science. And so across the health sectors, the science sectors, the innovation sectors, people are having an eye on going somewhere else because the UK and the position of the UK government does not seem coherent or